Well, it's been a long time coming, too long, frankly, but finally, Canadians are about to get a picture of the state of the country's finances. A federal budget is scheduled to be tabled tomorrow, and the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says Prime Minister Carney must put an end to a decade of Trudeau style spending binges. But fears Prime Minister Carney's budget may, in fact, be even worse. That's because Carney has vowed to both protect essential programs while also promising to spend big on so called nation building projects in housing, defense, infrastructure, and innovation. The budget is also expected to show a fiscal deficit of somewhere between 70 and $100 billion, meaning it'll cost taxpayers more than ever to service the interest on Canada's ballooning debt. The CTF's Franco Terrazzano will be joining us a little later on with his thoughts. Now, Carney came back empty-handed from his meeting with President Xi of China, but says the door is now open for some kind of resolution to the issue of Chinese tariffs on agriculture products from Canada.
You were talking to us about your meeting with President Xi. You said that this would be good for Canadian workers and their families. And so for the people who are producing canola and pork and seafood in Canada, what did you get out of this?
Well, for those hardworking farmers, fishers, a pathway to address the tariffs that China has on them. And we're going to be working hard to get those resolved and move forward, the first thing. The second thing, it opens up a much bigger set of opportunities for a broader range of Canadian businesses.
Well, pathway or not, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says when it comes to trade, Prime Minister Carney has completely failed to deliver. And even the CBC was forced to acknowledge the PM's failures after 7 months and 20 trips abroad.
It seems like everywhere Mark Carney goes, with these grand meetings and photo ops, we end up with more tariffs. His failures abroad are costing us at home.
He met with the Chinese president, though, and they made a decision that their officials were going to get together and try and solve the trade irritants. He is trying to make some progress, no? You don't see those things as a bit of progress?
What progress? Can you name one tariff line that he's reduced abroad?
No, not at this stage, no.
Not one. No. He said 7 months.
So what would
He's been on 20 trips.
Poor Rosie. Turns out President Trump was telling the truth when he said Canada apologized for the anti-tariff ad. Prime Minister Carney admitted as much to reporters. Let's listen.
Did you apologize to Donald Trump about Ontario's anti-tariff ad?
I did. I did apologize to the president. The president was offended by the act, or by the ad, rather. And it's not something I would have done, which is to put in place that advertisement. And so I apologize to him. Things happen. We take the good with the bad, and I apologize to him.
That he viewed the ad with you in advance of it going to air. Since you're the person that's solely responsible for negotiations, did you inform Mr. Ford that this is something that you did not want to go forward with?
Yes.
And what came of that?
Well, you saw what came of it.
Well, that's not Ford's version. Doug Ford said today he doesn't recollect it happening that way. Maybe he experienced it differently. He claims there was no expression of reservations in terms of running the ads by Prime Minister Carney. They can't both be telling the truth. Anyway, Poilievre says Carney embarrassed the country by approving the ads to begin with.
Do you think it was appropriate for the Prime Minister to apologize to Trump for the Ontario ad?
And Mr. Carney has been very duplicitous. He approved the ad, and then he condemned the ad, and then he apologized for the ad. He embarrassed himself and regrettably the whole country, and we can't trust Mark Carney abroad. We can't afford him here at home.
What a fiasco. The anti-tariff ad led to the termination of trade talks between Canada and the United States and may very well have scuttled a deal said to be all but completed. Joining me now is Franco Terrazzano of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation on the eve of a federal budget. Welcome, Franco.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, we have the budget coming up tomorrow. We're going to get to that in a minute, but we also have this back and forth going on between the former best buds, Doug Ford and Mark Carney, with different accounts of exactly what happened ahead of the release of this controversial ad that led to the scuttling of trade negotiations between Canada and the United States. With Ford now saying, well, I don't remember Prime Minister Carney telling me not to run these ads. So what do you make of that?
Well, it's a huge waste of money, right? Millions of dollars down the drain, but it's even worse than that because you're spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on this ad and like completely derailing our trade negotiations with the United States. So I think like people have every right to hold Premier Doug Ford accountable and potentially even Prime Minister Mark Carney, right? The question is when, if, and how much did Carney know of this ad before it went out the door? But look, we're talking about millions of dollars from taxpayers for this ad and to completely derail our trade negotiations with our biggest trading partner. I mean, what a complete waste of money. And the Premier needs to be held accountable to this for this at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. And the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada has made that point as well, which is, you can't distance yourself from an ad that you personally approved. So this is just an absolute fiasco, this whole thing. But let's talk a little bit about the federal budget scheduled for tomorrow. Now, Carney, really should put an end to a decade almost of Trudeau-style spending in terms of the binge that we have seen. But you have some concerns that it's not going to work out that way, don't you?
Yeah, I'm very worried that it's going to be another Trudeau-style budget, right? More debt, higher spending, a bloated federal government. I mean, look, like we just saw a decade where the federal government under Trudeau doubled the debt. Okay, Canadians' kids, grandkids, maybe even great-grandkids are going to be making payments on that debt for the rest of their lives. And the reason that the debt spiraled out of control is because spending spiraled out of control, right? And let's just be so real for a second. Regardless of what is going on internationally, if any politician spends $1 more than Trudeau, that should be considered a failure, especially for Prime Minister Mark Carney. He's the one who sold all these Canadians on this idea that he was the man with the plan, right? He's the economic and financial guru. Well, if we get this budget and the debt is up and spending is up, that should be considered a failure.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have the Prime Minister coming up and saying we have to protect essential programs. So, we're not going to be cutting those types of things. And we also have to have money allocated for these nation-building projects. We're talking about housing, defense, infrastructure, innovation. All of that is going to cost billions of dollars. I mean, especially when you're talking about defense and elevating spending to 2% of GDP. I mean, where's he going to find the money for all of this, Franco?
Well, the government doesn't have any money for this, right? So look, if they have new spending priorities, they better get up the big pair of scissors and cut somewhere else. And like, let's just put this extra defense spending into context. There's two things on that. Number one, the additional defense spending is what, about $9 billion extra on a $550 billion budget? Really? So you're telling me that there's no place else to cut significantly to fund that? But the second point too is kind of the broader issue with defense spending and arbitrary targets, right? Like, why is it only in government where the government measures success by how much something costs rather than the outcome it achieves, right? So like, look, I think the main takeaway is this. After a decade of completely reckless spending, finding savings in every area of the budget should be like finding water in the ocean. We should not let Carney off the hook. If he spends $1 more than Trudeau, that should be a bad budget. He should get the same grade as the last guy, which is a big fat F.
Yeah, well, we're looking at a deficit coming up between 70 and 100 billion. I mean, this, that'd be double what it was originally estimated at. So there's going to be a massive addition to the federal deficit, which means we're all going to be paying more to service the interest on that debt. So you can add that on the line, as a line on the budget is increased cost to taxpayers just in terms of servicing the massive debt. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right, right? So we're looking at interest charges probably north of $55 billion this year. Well, let's put that into perspective, right? That means interest charges are costing taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week. Well, what's $1 billion? That is a brand new hospital every week that is not getting built because that money is going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street to pay interest on Carney's debt. But let's also put it into two other ways here, okay? Because this year, the federal government will waste more money paying interest on the debt than what it sends to the provinces in healthcare transfers, right? Like, that is awful things. Or think about this the next time that you're waiting in line at the checkout, okay? Every single dollar that you paid in federal sales tax last year when to pay interest on the debt. Like, enough is enough, right? The government is broke. The government can't keep borrowing more money forever. And Canadian taxpayers shouldn't be expected to fork over more than $1 billion a week for interest payments.
Meantime, we got a bloated civil service. I believe during the Trudeau era, it grew by something around 40%. So, so we got all these bodies over there in Ottawa. Services are not really improving, at least by my way of looking at it, Franco. We've got to do something about that. I mean, do you have any indication that the government is going to look seriously at the numbers of people and maybe lay off a few of those civil servants, especially when you consider we're also spending $25 billion or so on consultants? I mean, any of this make sense?
No, it doesn't make any sense, right? Only in Ottawa, where they do not live inside reality because they are wasting your money, does this maybe make sense, but not to the real world, not to individual people. And you're right. The bureaucracy is out of control, okay? The federal government added 99,000 extra paper pushers and ballooned the cost of the bureaucracy 77% since 2016. Okay, all these other paper pushers taking bigger paychecks from taxpayers. And get this, Mark, most Canadians agree with you because we commissioned a Leger poll, and that poll found that half of Canadians say federal services have gotten worse since 2016, right? Despite the massive bureaucrat hiring spree, half of Canadians say federal services have gotten worse. Now, look, let's just be blunt. Let's just tell it like it is. The only way for the federal government to fix this budget mess is to fire bureaucrats. There's no other way around it. Attrition, not going to cut it. Just going on the margins on some pay and perks, not going to cut it. The only way that the government gets a handle on this debt mess is to fire bureaucrats.
We also have the issue of dealing with the tariff problem. Okay, so revenues are going to take a hit. We're in recession already. I mean, there's some consensus, growing consensus, that the economy is in a state of recession, shrinking, contracting, as it were. So there's going to be a massive push by the government to spend in areas where they think they can boost the economy. What do you think about that? I mean, do they have the green light here to move forward with massive spending commitments to try and prop up the Canadian economy?
We don't need the government to spend more money. Right? The government is not the solution. The government is the problem, right? You want to talk about economic growth. What's the elephant in the room? What's the big barrier to economic growth in Canada? It's the government. And look, let's get into the heart of the matter, because essentially the argument that Carney's trying to make is the same argument that Trudeau made, right? That we need more government borrowing to help the economy. Well, folks, we just had 10 years of that. The experiment was tried and it failed. Okay, government is the problem. You want to grow the economy? Well, then we got to go on a massive tax cutting campaign, right? Canada's tax system is uncompetitive. The government is taking way too much money from Canadians and Canadian entrepreneurs and investors who would like to put their money in Canada. Or how about this? Get rid of the No More Pipelines law, the discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast, the industrial carbon tax, the hidden carbon tax through fuel regulations, the cap on oil and gas production. Folks, the government is not the solution. The government is the problem.
But they don't see it that way. They think that they have the pretext here and blaming Trump and the tariff situation. Say, well, we have to spend. This is a time of crisis for our economy. I mean, we have to do this in order to keep Canada's economy rolling somewhat. But you're convinced that that's not the way to go.
Of course I'm convinced. We just lived through 10 years of this, right? And the economy has stagnated. The cost of living has gone through the roof. Look, you know why those politicians don't want to admit it? Because they don't want to admit that they are the problem and that they need to get out of the way. That's why they don't want to admit it, right? They want to sit here in Ottawa, collect their six-figure paychecks, hire more bureaucrats. They don't want to go toe-to-toe with the government union bosses. But look, eventually the rubber's going to meet the road here. Right? There is no getting out of the way. There is no not acknowledging the real problem. And the real problem is that Canada's economy is overregulated by bad regulations, many of the ones that I already named. and also the fact that we have this massive government burden being placed on the productive sector in Canada, right? Essentially, we've got the tale of two Canadas, where we've seen for many, many years financial pain to those in the private sector, those working outside of business, while those shielded by the golden gates of government have been seeing what? Nothing but financial gain.
But they also promised us a tax cut, right? Remember that middle class tax cut that they promised? And so that's going to undercut their revenues. I mean, would you say that maybe they should nix the tax cut in order to try and get a little, get the budget a little close to being balanced?
No, because I'm not going to let these politicians get off the hook, right? It's not taxpayers' fault that the federal government is $1 trillion in debt. It's their fault. Like, they've been spending money like crazy. No, they should give our money back to us with further tax cuts. But guess what? That means they have to do the right thing for once and actually cut spending, right? Actually fire bureaucrats. Like, they should be cutting taxes further, right? We are in a position here where you look at all the different taxes that you pay, federally, provincial, municipally. Almost half of the average family's budget is going to taxes. Taxes cost the average family more than what? Housing, clothing, and food combined. So yes, we need tax cuts, but we also need the government to do the right thing, the hard work, and that's to cut the bloated bureaucracy in Ottawa.
And they're trying to convince businesses in Canada to expand their operations in this country, even as the regulatory burden remains high in Canada. Taxes still remain high. Energy costs are still too high. And so that's a pretty tall order. I mean, you're looking to double your exports over the next 10 years to countries not named the United States of America. But the investment in Canada is on the decline, like a radical decline. I mean, how do you convince corporations, companies of all types to continue investing in Canada while the tariff war continues? And of course, many U.S. states offer a much lower rate of taxation, lower energy costs. It's awfully tempting for some of these companies in Canada to look south and say, you know what, I'm out of here. What do you think?
Well, I think you nailed it right at the end when you said tax burden is lower elsewhere, right? Like, this is kind of goes back to the entire conversation that we're having here. And even broader than that, look, you have Carney focusing on all these international trips, but the key thing that he should be focusing on is right here at home, cutting the tax burden, cutting the regulation, balancing the budget, right? Actually bringing debt down. And you'll talk to the business community and they'll let you know that when you see governments with these massive deficits, well, that creates even more business uncertainty, right? Because deficits, debt today means taxes tomorrow. So businesses are looking at these massive deficits and they're saying, well, if we set up shop here and we have a long-term investment that won't come to fruition till 5, 10, maybe 15 years down the road, well, they're worried that the massive deficits today are going to mean massive tax increases tomorrow when that investment comes to fruition. So, like, what can the government do? Cut taxes, cut spending, actually balance the budget. Like, none of this is new, right? Everyone has known about this for what? All of modern history. But we just have to see politicians in Ottawa come back down to planet Earth here.
Unfortunately, they may look at more government subsidies, just like they did with handing, Stellantis, $15 billion. And all these other companies for EVs, that has all turned into a big fat disaster. So unfortunately, rather than trying to create an environment in Canada of lower taxation, lower regulatory burdens, they would rather just say, no, let's pick winners and losers here, throw billions of dollars in corporate welfare at some of these corporations and then hope for the best. And it's not working. Last word to you.
Well, look, when politicians are spending your money, not their own, you might as well just send them to the casino. Right? Like, it's a bad bet. And look, like, the corporate welfare is costing, $11 billion a year federally alone, all corporate welfare. Look, that means that the government is taking about $1,100 from each Canadian family of 4 to hand out in corporate welfare. Again, cut the spending, cut taxes and red tape. That is the recipe for success.
Franco Terrazzano, Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Have fun tomorrow.
I will. Hey, thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Franco. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? See you next time.